In times like these, during the COVID-19 crisis, we are called on to find creative new ways to span the distances between and among us. I ask for both your indulgence and understanding in what follows. This is my way of remembering and celebrating the life of my mom. Computer, open a shipwide channel. Welcome. We are here today to celebrate the life of Eleanore Knecht, my mom. It was 6:59 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, Earth, when I received a text message from my sister saying Eleanore Knecht, our mom, had been taken to the hospital complaining of not being able to breathe. This was not COVID related. About an hour later, the phone rang. It was a kind of call that you could tell by the tone of the voice on the other end, before barely the words were formed, the answer to the questions that were already running through your mind. Marlin, Mom passed away. So here we are today, reaching out across the expanse to memorialize the life of one Eleanore Knecht. In the days since that initial call, I have had time to pray, meditate, and reflect on what I would say at whatever service arrangements we could come up with. Over and over again, there were four words that came to mind. The assurance of love. I think when it's your grandmother, your grandfather, your mom, your father, your sister, your brother, your son, your daughter, your uncle or aunt or cousin, your husband, your wife, the view is inherently different and intensely personal. As these things go, as an observer somewhat removed, we might be tempted to ask the question, are funerals and memorial services and promises of heaven just a placation for a grieving soul? Marx's opiate of the masses, or salve for the soul, as it were. We can be forgiven if we were to ask if the summation of a life is not arguably based on a one-sided account, cherry-picked from an assortment of life's memories. Is a person's passing the beginning of a natural deference to the good with a preferential erosion of the bad, while the more difficult times are washed away in the waters of time and eternity? Finally, all any of us can do is speak from our own perspective and experience. But I am here to tell you and affirm to you what I have witnessed and hereby give testament to, nor can I mitigate the truth in this telling. But rest easy. This is a blessed and wonderful story. I will also affirm that as I struggle to put these words together, that it is remarkably difficult to talk about my mom without also talking about my dad, as the rings of a recollected and radiant, outwardly expanding circle are taken into account. Those of close family and friends, their church, their community at large, and still others. The story is an interconnected and inclusive one. My mom was one half of the filament that shed light and love on the surrounding world. The lives that touch lives and still other lives, and so on. If we can learn anything from the current situation, it is that what works with the epidemiological and exponential progression of a disease across a global population with difficult consequences and outcomes for a great number of individuals also works in a positive way with the radiant possibility and power of love. A drop of light in the universal sea that sends out its own amplified ripples, where one life touches another life, and one heart another heart, and so on in multiple iterations across time, communities, and in this day and age, even nations, onto the whole world. In the words of Gandhi, we can invite ourselves to become the change we wish to see in the world. With this, if someone were to ask me what one word defines my mom, it would be love. Yet there are the familiar stories to many of us of the camping, canoeing, and backpacking trips that have been referenced many times at many different occasions, across the temporal expanse of birthdays, anniversaries, and at other gatherings. These often punctuate and mark time for nearly all of us. But as I reflect upon this moment, I want to take this to another level, to do the topic of my mom's life justice. Yes, it is true that Verna and I, in essence, began what amounted to a ropes course while she was still in diapers. These adventures, explorations, and experiences made up a large portion of our early childhoods. In fact, by the time I was 14 and she was 13, we'd been in all 50 states and visited 3 countries. By my dad's recollection, we'd canoed some 2,000 miles together. And by my own recollection, probably walked, hiked, and backpacked another 2,000 or 3,000 miles, perhaps more. One doesn't do these things as a family without having certain things come out of these experiences. More than the tangibility of the experiences themselves are the things like teamwork, organization, discipline, focus, tenacity, persistence, and trust in one aspect, and transformation, problem solving, and proactive action in another. And yet still another aspect, the love of nature and celebrating God while in an untouched and pristine wilderness. Through all of this, there was a constant in our universe, the assurance of love. If we stopped here, we wouldn't begin to cover the depth, meaning, and accomplishment that my mom, in fact, both her parents succeeded at through those early years. And yet, as we gaze back across the horizons of history and the experiences that brought them, I can and do appreciate with nearly unending deep gratitude that it was the imperfection taken with the perfection that put the carbon in the steel. This took us to those states of being, having been tempered and tested, that prepared us for our own tomorrows. I can't tell you how many times people that would come along on these adventures would occasionally say, "Your dad is very organized," with an ever so slight flavor of the disdain in your words, for it smacked a little bit of being in the military. Yes, we each had a number, and our packs, sleeping bags, canteens, and more were all numbered. To the casual observer, it might appear that we were part of a robot army, but underneath all of this was again this assurance of love. This place is not in the realm of the objectified, but in the realm of the valued, appreciated, and cared for. Approaching a situation with planning and preparation. With this, we often witnessed others that had not taken these measures, who were experiencing their situation quite differently. I will grant you, that backpacking through 30 miles of wilderness isn't everyone's cup of tea or idea of a family vacation. But our family system, which on these trips most usually included a close family friend, Ev, gave us the ability to taste the nectar of life's edges and do so relatively safely. Though there are those that would debate this last statement. And to be fair, what for me was most often a situation where I found myself enthralled to the challenge others would have or could have experienced as trauma. Whether it was in the depths of the West Virginia wilderness, Pennsylvania canyons, on the Alaskan tundra, or on and in the lakes of the Canadian wilderness, we were often confronted with some trying and at times very trying situations. This spanned the spectrum from the sublime, and I dare say sacred, to the exciting and challenging. Even today, I find my preference for my prayer and meditation time is walking in the quiet of nature. In the center of these experiences was an implicit requirement of bringing our all to them, of boldly going into the undiscovered country and the unknown. But it is here again where my mom really shined. Over the course of decades, I have often reflected on what it took to sit in the front of a canoe with their 10 or 11-year-old son steering the way through a set of difficult rapids. This experience instilled in me both a sense of responsibility and confidence to meet the challenges that I would face later in life, though there were days that ended up in an emergency room after a nasty spill. Apparently, it is not legal to be buried in a canoe in Ohio, though Michael and I independently came up with this idea and discovered this while making arrangements for this occasion. The first picture that came to me was of my mom laying there in a canoe with an orange life preserver on, a large bouquet of yellow flowers in her hands, and the words written somewhere, perhaps on the license patch on the canoe, "I didn't die canoeing," thumbs up at the end. Upon expressing this as a somewhat sacrilegious idea, Verna said, "Mom would say, 'Marlin, you're so bad,' and then say, 'I love you anyway.'" In saying all of this, I want to acknowledge this was a life of privilege. When we take this in contrast to the world's population and the distribution curve of lived experience across human civilization, this privilege for me came with a responsibility to help and serve others. These formative experiences took me over the years to teach problem solving to rocket scientists and to dare to work on a planetary solution model and management system. This as a service to and for others, and along with this to my own friends and family. For if we don't have an inhabitable world, nothing else really works. Our family system during these experiences supported and in many ways prepared us for our family's unstated but modeled mission of service. No doubt this has manifested itself in many different ways throughout our various lives. Not always perfectly, I might add. But looking back at these memories, this was undoubtedly an echoed iteration of what those sets of grandparents before us left as their legacy, and from my perspective, echoed in the lives of my dad, my uncle in the military, and my aunt as a nurse and a policewoman. Both of my parents have been committed to a life of service, each in their own way. My mom was a servant warrior in this respect, but her wars were waged with words of kindness, and her weapons were based on love and understanding. Whether it was setting up a baby shower for a young couple, baking a casserole for someone going through a difficult time, or standing in pouring rain cooking a meal for her family during a camping trip, this was just what she did. If you've read the words of Carl Jung, Amelia Jaffe, or the more popularized Joseph Campbell, we can look deep into the archetypes of humanity and discover these parts of life found across cultures and civilizations. But to me, My mom was a hero on a hero's journey. She led by example and lived servant-based leadership by taking often proactive action in situations when something needed done, and then stepping into the situation in whatever capacity was needed. Her love languages often found their articulation in acts of service and baking food. One of the things I've tried to pass on to my kids is the idea of servant-based leadership. And with this, the idea of highest service, doing that which you are most uniquely qualified to do. Over and over again on our journey, and with this meet our more real self, finding certain mile markers and destinations along the way. Articulated by the words of the Apostle Paul, "For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror, then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known." If God were on the end of this developmental journey, the perfecting of the saints, calling for us to step into this reality, my mom, and yes, so many others, were standing on the other end, empowering it, facilitating it, serving this greater cause of the becoming. It is by stepping into this process, and by extension inviting others to step with us, that we realize the empirical evidence that affirms and validates the answer to the first questions I asked. Is this only a placated salve for the soul? Or could it be that by daring to step into tomorrow's possibilities, we find new ways of being, and with this, new states of being and existence that validate and verify that reality is much more than we might think or imagine. At each mile marker on this journey, we find that our way of learning, our experience of love, our experience of life can change in an upward spiral. That the nexus to the next is but one iteration of these steps. Again, in the paraphrased words of the Apostle Paul, where we are not conformed to this world, but transformed by the renewing of our minds, hearts, and souls. That last part was mine. The world will not be improved by conforming to it. It will only be improved by those with the boldness to step into the realm of the unknown and unseen. The realm that requires the wisdom to have the courage, to have the faith, that we might then find the empirical evidence in the realized reality that brings belief and lived affirmation. That they might realize, as it says in Luke, the kingdom of heaven within, while watching as a witness participant the mirroring of this in the external world. We will only accomplish heaven on earth, as it is stated in the Lord's Prayer, by lending our strength vector to this great cause. Or as stated in the book of James, drawing nigh unto God and His drawing nigh unto us, all while being covered by the ark of grace while we learn. From my perspective, my mom was a warrior on this front, and today a fallen hero in my eyes. She met these challenges alongside of us, and even more so by both figuratively and literally placing herself in the same boat with us. To me, it is only the great ones that have the steel to step into the fire alongside of you, stay with you, lead by example, be vulnerable, bridge the gap between the stages of becoming and being in an ongoing developmental process that we might find our more real selves. This was accomplished by standing on the unshakable ground that is the assurance of love. So when you take these archetypes that we find across the expanse of cultures and civilizations and put them together, to me, she represented the best aspects of a few of them. So, Mom, I appreciate you, and I salute you for your love and service in this world, a love that will continue to shine in our hearts, minds, and souls, while being radiated and amplified across and by the generations that follow, and throughout the expanse of time and space, onto eternity, infinite possibility, and beyond. And Mom, since we couldn't do the canoe, I thought for my part, I'd send you off this way. Yeah, I know it's a virtual spaceship in a virtual nation, but hey, it's the very best of what I've got. Love, Marlin.
Was